So we go all the way back to the time of the Buddha, and they are sat in a clearing, and the Buddha says, you'll never guess what happened today. Yeah? He says to the followers that are there with him, you'll never guess what happened today. So a bit like you and I might, after a long day of work, we come back in and we say, you'll never guess what happened today. So the Buddha recounts this story to his followers, and he says, well, I was out meditating, and this Shakyan, somebody from the Shakyan clan, came along, and the name of this particular guy was Dandapani, and the name slightly gives it away. The name means stick in hand. So Dandapani comes, and he's on his sort of walk for the day. He's on his sort of ramble for the day, and he comes and he encounters the Buddha. Now, stick in hand gives a little bit of a hint as to the temperament of Dandapani. So Dandapani's out looking for a scrap. Yeah, he's out looking for a metaphorical scrap. You often see this in the Pali Canon. People come out and they want to challenge the Buddha to a debate, because spiritually it was a very alive time in India at the time, and there were lots of spiritual theories and teachers, and lots of competition between all of them, and very certain theories as to what worked and what didn't work. And Dandapani presumably had his own particular theory as to what was spiritually efficacious. And so stick in hand suggests he's out looking for a scrap. And he comes across the Buddha, and he says to the Buddha, what is the contemplative's doctrine? So he comes across the Buddha. He's presumably maybe just sat meditating under a tree, or he's in a clearing, and he doesn't know who the Buddha is, so he asks him, what is the contemplative's doctrine? And the Buddha says to him, so I'll read exactly what the Buddha says. He says, the sort of doctrine, friend, where one does not keep quarrelling with anyone in the cosmos, with its devas, maras and brahmas, with its contemplatives and brahmins, its royalty and common folk. The sort of doctrine where perceptions no longer obsess the Brahmin, who remains dissociated from sensuality, free from perplexity, his uncertainty cut away, devoid of craving for becoming and non-becoming. Such is my doctrine, such is what I proclaim. So what does the Buddha do? What's the Buddha done there?
Word shame. He word shamed that guy.
He word shamed him. Well, what he's kind of done is he said, look, well, I'm not playing your game, hasn't he? He said, oh, I'm not playing your game. He's given him a little riposte. He's given him a sort of little touche. He says, Dandapani's come out looking for a scrap, and he knows he's looking for a scrap. You meet people like that, don't they? You meet them and they start asking you provocative questions because they're looking for a fight, yeah? And you can sense it when you get that. You know, they ask you, I don't know, they're looking for a fight. And Dandapani's come, well, what is the contemplative's doctrine? And he's hanging for a fight. And the Buddha says, well, the contemplative's doctrine is one that does not lead to conflict. So he said, well, actually, do you know what? I'm not playing your game. I'm not playing this game. So that's what he says to Dandapani. And Dandapani, shaking his head, wagging his tongue, raising his eyebrows so that his forehead was wrinkled in 3 furrows, he left. Yeah, so I don't know what that would look yeah. Weird. Yeah? Don't know what that would look like, but that's what he does. So basically he gives him a bit of an eye roll. It's like, yeah, that's what he does. Yeah? Typical. Yeah? So that's what he does, and he walks off. So as if to say, oh, I can't be bothered, I can't be bothered today. So he walks off. So the Buddha goes and he tells his followers back this, and the monks particularly are interested to hear, well, what is it? How does the Buddha's doctrine not lead to conflict? They pick up on that again. How does the Buddha's doctrine not lead to conflict? And he says, if, monk, with regard to the cause whereby the perceptions and categories of objectification assail a person, there is nothing there to relish, welcome, or remain fastened to, then that is the end of the obsessions of passion, the obsessions of resistance, the obsessions of views, the obsessions of uncertainty, the obsessions of conceit, the obsessions of passion for becoming, and the obsessions of ignorance, or something like that. What you do is you try and break the problem down into smaller bits. So with Vedana presenting a problem, we're now going to have to try and differentiate our initial sensation. We're going to have to look to see at our raw sort of experience and clarify, okay, what are the aspects of this experience and what might be causing this particular sensation. We need to be able to break up this particular raw experience into manageable blocks, basically, or manipulatable blocks, so that we can see what aspects of it might be causing this. So if, say, for example, if I'm having a very unpleasant experience, I need to go, okay, and I'm having it's not a bad experience so far, but if I was having a very unpleasant experience, I'd need to go, okay, how do I discern what's happening here? So now I've no longer got an undifferentiated sort of mass of colours and sounds and smells in front of me, but I've got people. And I've got people who might be bored or interested or distracted or whatever it might be. Some more engaged than others, and I'd need to start sort of breaking that down into units. I'd need to break it down into something like temperature or smell or something like that. So all of these things that we usually look to discern what it is exactly that's causing a particular experience, I'd need to start breaking it down. And what we do with that is, according to Mahakachana, is we go to samnya. And samnya is something like perception. Yeah? So here, with samnya, we're starting to label the aspects of our experience more and more. We are going, okay, that's Simon, that's Kusalasara. Simon I know from many years ago, he's a mitra at the Centre Kusalasara as an order member. Some of you I don't know. We're starting to put more sort of labels onto our experience, so we can start to figure out what it is that's going on. Now that includes the very basic element of perception, but it also starts to involve conception as well. Yeah, so it's both perception and conception. And what I mean by conception is something like the conceptualizing of the various aspects of my experience, or sort of abstracting things into more kind of general characteristics. So it might be something like, well, in any particular situation, it could be ugly and beautiful. It could be effective and non-effective. It could be poisonous or nourishing. It could be broken or working. It could be friend or enemy. All of those things. So now these are conceptualized labels that we start to put onto the units of things that we've started to discern and break up with samnya. So at this point we've broken things up into much more discernible units, and we're starting to sort of conceptualize around them and apply labels to them. Now of course none of that is in this raw sensation, yeah? None of that is in this raw contact. This is just completely mute. Yeah, it just comes to you completely sort of neutrally and mute. Here is where we start to do it. We start to apply these labels. And of course, as we start to apply these labels, we start to make the experience more abstracted and more broad and more sort of generalizable, so that we can categorize things into various sort of groupings, so that we sort of know, or we have a theory how to work with them a bit more. Yeah? That basically the two sort of significant categories that I think that we put things into, and this comes all the way back from our more sort of animal nature, is threat or friend. Yeah, it's threat or friend. So animals do this basically. They do all of this bit by instinct. They don't conceptualize like us. They don't put sort of labels and concepts onto things like we do. but they do it all kind of by sort of instinct. Pretty impressive instinct as well. You know, you get the geese, the Canadian geese fly all that direction every year, or, you know, come back to the same points, like really, really incredibly, without conceptualizing. They do it all by instinct, but we conceptualize. You know, we don't do it so much by instinct. But what we share with our sort of animal brethren is probably the two significant things that we put things into are friend or threat. It's interesting, apparently the first thing that we look to do, our mind looks to do, is to, when we meet somebody, is to try and discern their sex. And that of course goes all the way back to our animal nature as well, because it says either mate or potential competition. Yeah, so we do that in sort of milliseconds. That's the first sort of thing that the mind wants to do when it comes across somebody else, is to categorize on the basis of either male or female. And the idea is this a potential mate, or is this a potential competition or a friend, or whatever it might be. So that the mind does this in sort of milliseconds. It's starting to kind of label and conceptualize in sort of milliseconds. It goes very, very quickly. It can happen a bit more slowly as well. I'll tell you a little bit of a story, just from light relief. This is pretty heady stuff, but I'll tell you a story. But I was in Spain on my ordination retreat, and basically when I walked in to the shrine room, I could see that the candles were unlit, a bit like here, right? But in this particular shrine in Spain, there was sort of layers to it, there was levels to it, there was 3 levels to it, I think. Now the first teaching you're always given when you go to this particular place in Spain is always light the top ones first. Yeah, of course, I never listen to that sort of stuff, I think, whatever. Always light the top. It's a very good reason, folks, right? Especially when you're wearing robes. Yeah? So always light the top ones first, especially when you're wearing robes. So in I walk, and of course, what do? But I light the bottom candles first, yeah? And I've got a lit match in my hand, so I'm up sort of like, you know, the bottom ones first, and then I'm up kind of looking for the next ones, completely paying no attention, yeah? And then a sort of general sensation of heat, sort of just around my legs, yeah? I sort of don't think too much of it, not sort of worrying. Now this is still going on very quickly, this is still seconds, yeah? All of this is still seconds, but a general sort of sensation of heat leading to some rapidly worsening Vedana, yeah? So starting to sort of go a little bit on the painful side of things. But of course the samnya hasn't kicked in yet, right? So I'm lighting these sort of top candles and the general sort of sensation of heat. And it's starting to grow. I think, God, what might that be? And to include in the sensation, there's a general burning smell that's coming up as well. You know? This eventually gets so bad that samnya does its job and it kicks in and it goes fire. Yeah, you're on fire. It goes, okay, we know what sensation is. Can we categorize that raw experience into what might be happening to you? Yes, you're on fire. Yeah? And that gets you acting pretty quickly. Yeah. So I looked down and my whole robe is sort of alight. I've sort of lit myself in a grand offering to the Buddha. So I promptly do the stop, drop and roll. Luckily nobody was in the shrine at the time, so I was saved my embarrassment. Yeah, but I did the stop, drop and roll, but all the sort of skirt of the robe had just been covered and the whole shrine room stank. Yeah, so it was really very, very embarrassing, but I thought it was quite a good sort of example of the thing, because sensation, you know, the experience itself of the heat doesn't tell me anything that's happening. The Vedana, as it starts to get more painful, tells me, well, something's happening, so you better do something about it. And then the samnya, without even sort of looking down to see I was on fire, kicked in and got, oh, of course, you're on fire. Yeah. So that's a sort of little example where it happens. but it's a bit more sort of perceptibly or a bit more gradually. Now here, that's been a sort of whole situation of threat, and it's been sort of general to everybody. And everybody, if you're on fire, just about all of us will start to go through that process to the point of sort of realizing you're on fire. But actually, this experience can be very, very individual, depending on the situation, to each individual. Very, very unique to each individual. So what some of us deem threat, for example, or label threat in our experience, a lot of others will just label friend. Yeah. So what a lot of us will go threat, and say they meet you meet somebody, and you're immediately, the first thing that you do that you meet somebody, you're just starting to sort of label and sum them up. The very human tendency to put them immediately into samnya. And start to figure out, well, what sort of person is this to me? And of course, the main evolutionary drive is to see can they help me, or are they going to harm me? Are they any use to me? You remember, with this, what we're looking to do is always to put our experience into more manipulatable units for our own gain. That's a very natural part of unenlightenment experience. It's for our own gain. And so when we meet somebody, for example, that's always the kind of first thing that starts. I remember when I first moved to London, I realised a lot of people would ask you what you do, and it didn't really seem to be about what you did so much as, okay, how do I relate to you? It's immediately they want you in a category, and I do this and you do this and everybody does this. Yeah, so we immediately want to sort of figure out how to kind of categorise somebody that we're talking to. So we might, and you can have very different individual examples. So we might, for example, come across, you pass homeless people on the street. One person will have a label and an interpretation of a loser, or somebody who, should be sort of locked up or something like that. Who's basically, it's completely their own blame and fault that they're in that situation. Another person might go somebody that's sort of just down on their luck, or made a few wrong choices in life and has been a bit unlucky. So samnya is a very, very unique and individual thing to all of us. And what feeds into samnya is all these sort of latent dispositions that we have, and our own particular way of interpreting the world, which will be very, very unique to us. We all have a sort of way of interpreting the world which is very, very unique to us. More or less correct, yeah? It's not to say that samnya is completely false. It's nearly always simplified, a bit like Kashmich was saying in the first half. You can put labels onto a country like Bangladesh, for example. It won't be that they're completely wrong, but they will be deeply simplified as well, and often false. So there's a sort of, it's not to say anything about the samnya, about the accuracy of our interpretation. That will be more or less correct, depending. So what we've got when we've got to samnya, we've labelled our experience, we've discerned it, we've cut it up into sort of little manageable bits. We've perceived it, we've labelled it, we've conceived it, so we've labelled it, and then what we do is we start thinking about it, yeah? Vitarka. So this is to start thinking about it. So this now is starting to get into a sort of higher order of interpretation, or even a more sort of extracted form of interpretation. So what we've done with samnya is we've labelled things, and now with thinking we're going to start sort of ordering them, yeah? We're going to start putting them into theories of the world. So once you've labelled something, you need to start to see how those various different labels and conceptions relate to the other labels and conceptions around them. So we start thinking. We start thinking, okay, does this lead to this? So we start to come up with sort of theories of the world and theories of our life. So we go, okay, how does this little bit relate to this little bit? If I do these two things together, what happens with them? How does this all work as a sort of whole? How does it work as a system? So we kind of start theorizing. So we've now got to a sort of higher level of abstraction and a higher level of interpretation with this particular point. This is where we start thinking. We start to think, for example, why isn't this working out? If we're in a situation where we're not doing very well, we start to think, why isn't this working out? And we start to relate all the little bits of this perception into a theory, is to try and discern why isn't something working out, or if something's going well, discerning how are all the little bits of it leading to something going particularly well. So this is where we start to give rise to thought. We sort of develop networks of thought, you could say, or an interpretive theory. More and more, this sort of goes into ideology. Yeah, that's what happens with these. So ideologies are a crystallization of this particular vitarka. They're a sort of total kind of explanation as to why the world is the way it is, and what to do to change about it. Yeah, so that's where you're starting to get into ideologies. When I was very young, when I was a young man, you could say to the very least I was angry. My mother claimed I was angry coming out of the womb. I would have said there's good reason. It was nice in there. It was quite warm. I was fed. I was thrust out into the meanness of the cold world. Yeah. And my mother claimed I was angry coming out of the womb, and it wasn't without basis. That anger built up through my teenage years, and you could say I had a high level of teenage angst, and teenage rage. I did what every good young angry man does, and I got into Marxist politics. I joined the Socialist Party in Ireland, and I got into Marxist politics. And every other Saturday morning, you'd see me, if you ever went to the Central Bank in Dublin, you'd see me with a megaphone shouting about something. Could have been anything, didn't really mind. Got to shout into a megaphone. Fantastic. Or I'd go and I'd sort of knock on doors and look to sell papers, or I'd do walkouts and things like that. So I got involved in sort of Marxist politics. It was very interesting because my dad used to say, very accurate actually, he used to liken me to Don Quixote. So if anybody's ever read Don Quixote by Cervantes, he's this sort of knight who's gone completely mad, and he thinks he's on a quest to get his princess, his fair lady, and he goes off on this completely sort of mythical quest, where he just completely misinterprets everything around him. Everything becomes a threat. Famously, you'll sometimes see the way Don Quixote is depicted in paintings. He attacks windmills, thinking they're dragons. Yeah. So my dad used to say to me, you're a bit like Don Quixote. You're seeing dragons everywhere, and all you're doing is attacking windmills. Yeah? So I had this Vedana sensation of anger. A Vedana that was sort of unpleasant and wanted to get rid of it. Samnya, perceiving what the sort of elements were of that, and Vitarka of sort of thought, which was who was to blame. Who was to blame for my anger? If I'm angry, there must be a good reason for that. There must be something responsible for that. And of course, Marxism comes and says, well, this is why you're angry, and this is who's responsible. So of course, jump on that. It's fantastic. But of course, it's based on, certainly was in my case, it was based on a misperception, a misinterpretation. I was attacking windmills, thinking that they were dragons. So it was, again, an incorrect sort of perception of the world. And I remember actually one day, it was funny, there was a group of about 8 of us, who were on this sort of socialist youth. It was the youth body of this thing. The leadership body was 8 people, and the total membership was probably 12 people. So, but I noticed actually one day I just happened to sort of clock that of the 8 of us, 6 of us were on antidepressants, including me. Yeah, 6 of us were on antidepressants, and I thought, ooh, I wonder what that's about. Yeah, and apparently this is very common actually if you look in activist circles. Very often mental health problems are a significant component. People with mental health problems are a significant component of that. Now you could argue the direction of causation there, but probably a lot of it is because, well, they're seeing dragons where there's only windmills. Yeah, so that's where we start to, this is where we start to get into sort of vitarka. It's more and more the sort of state of the world actually is what I've noticed, is that people get lost in this whole phenomena, this tendency to abstraction and a sort of alienation, which becomes more and more dissociated from the original experience. People start to live more and more in the world of phantoms. I'm a Mitra convener here at the LBC, and so my job is just to sort of meet with young guys coming to the centre for the first time. So I get to sort of, I'm in contact with a lot of the kind of, well, I suppose the ideas that are prevalent out there in the world. And what's really, really clear is, particularly guys that have come from university, is that they're sort of completely lost in that, to the extent that they inhabit a completely alternative world from this one. Yeah, they're completely wrapped up in phantoms. And the phantoms could be anything from, could be the globalists or the patriarchy or the wokerati or the whatever it might be. Now that's not to say that none of those particular ways of seeing don't have some truth to them. It's just that they're deeply simplified, often completely false, but often just simplified, and have stopped having any connection to this. There's nothing in this that sort of connected with it. It just goes off into its own world, basically. So this is what starts to happen with vitarka, is we get with thought, with ideologizing or theorizing or thinking in that very abstract way, is we get completely sort of dissociated. We often get dissociated from our bodies as well, because of course our bodies are the senses, aren't they? That's what we mean by being physically embodied. We just mean embodied, connected with the senses. So we get more sort of abstracted. Oops. So at some point, this process of thinking, let's not even say we've got into a full-blown sort of ideology yet, this whole process of thinking, Mahakachana says, gets out of control. And then what happens then is we get into prapancha. Yeah? So this was this word I was saying earlier, and many of you will have probably heard this word already. But with prapancha, it comes apparently from panch in Sanskrit, which is 5, which is the suggestion, this aspect, like this idea of like branching out. So it's etymologically connected with the hand, and the hand sort of branches out, doesn't it? So you'll all be sort of familiar with this. You've sat down to meditate, and your thoughts just completely proliferate. They just completely sort of go off. One leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, often sort of completely all over the place. That's that phenomena of prapancha. So it's proliferation of thought. And when you get into enough vitarka, this starts to get out of control, doesn't it? You just ruminate. This is really what another term for this word is, just rumination. So you get into sort of really kind of deep rumination. Particularly the stronger that this sensation of Vedana is, the more and more strong Vedana is, the more that the tendency will be to get into prapancha. You can see, like say for example, if you've got a friend that's very, very upset, you can see they're completely lost in prapancha, don't you? They're completely sort of preoccupied. You're talking to them, but they're not really sort of taking you in at all. They're off and they're kind of looking around, they're sort of distracted, and you can almost see the sort of thoughts just kind of flicker over their face, can't you? They sort of go and they kind of like, and that's this whole process of prapancha which is trying to figure out what's wrong. It's the tendency of mind to want to solve and control your situation. Is furiously sort of working, and it's not landing on something that's deemed reasonable or sort of satisfactory to explain the situation and therefore to control the situation. And you can see it with people. It was my particular experience of depression actually, was just being lost in thought. I mean, my mind just screamed at me all day long, like just completely random sort of unassociated, proliferated thought that just went totally out of control, because the Vedana of my experience was so unpleasant that this just had to keep on running to try and sort of establish what it is that the problem was. So you get into sort of prapancha. You get this as well, say for example, if somebody's upset you, it's just sort of, it's just on your mind, isn't it? You sort of go around and around and around, and you sort of try out all these various different theories, these vitarkas, as to why it is that they might have upset you. What it is that you done, or what it is about them that they said that thing. Why did they do that? You just sort of go over it and over and over and over. You kind of pick it up and carry it around with you all day long. And mostly it's to try and give us a sense of control. Yeah, for people to explain is to control. When we don't have a particularly good explanation for something, the feeling is fundamentally of being out of control. We don't feel like that we have any agency. If we can't explain what's happening to us, we feel like we have no agency, we have no way of moving forward. And so then what happens is, and that's deeply anxiety provoking, isn't it? We feel incredibly insecure when we don't know what's happening. Like say, for example, if you go into a foreign culture for the first time, you don't know what's happening, do you? You don't know the rules of the game in that particular culture. So you get anxious and you start to try and figure out, your whole sort of system starts to try and figure out, okay, how do I operate in this particular culture? But until you get to that point, you're very, very anxious and you sort of feel out of control. You make silly mistakes, you offend people, whatever it might be. You just feel anxious and you feel sort of out of control. So we've got this tendency, this mania towards explanation. We sort of need a diagnosis. We need a diagnosis of what's happening. So what that goes to, and this is the last step, or the second last step, I should say. The last step is fairly straightforward. That keeps going, and prapancha turns into prapancha. Samya. Sanka. Yeah? And what this means is a sort of summarized total position. Yeah? So a completely sort of worked out theory. This is when prapancha has got to this point. Sankha means together. Yeah, it means unified. So you've got this complete sort of total kind of theory. And it's the moment where it all sort of goes clunk. Yeah? And you get this satisfying, oh yeah, that's what it is. It all just sort of fits together and you've gone, that's what I think about it. And that explains the situation and that's going to give me more control. And of course, because you've explained it, that sense of anxiety just goes and you get this satisfying sort of clunk. So in the example, say for example, of somebody upsetting you, you go around and around this sort of prapancha wheel all day long until you go, that's their problem. Yeah? They don't like me because of this. Yeah? Or they don't like me because of that thing. Or they're jealous of me. Yeah? Or they want my boyfriend or they want my girlfriend, yeah? Or something like that. Yeah? And all of a sudden, everything just goes, okay. I've explained it now. That's great. So it's that sort of just clunk of everything into place. and we've then got an explanation. We've sort of explained things as far as we're concerned. Anyway, I've got a very funny story about that, where my dad, my mum and my dad lived in Britain. So I was born in Bournemouth in 1985, and my mum and dad lived in Britain through the 80s. And my dad is famous. My mum loves telling this story. Absolutely loves telling. They're separated. My mum loves telling this story. My dad is famously bad at DIY. Right? Gets completely wound up when he does DIY. We learned very quickly as kids and teenagers not to go anywhere near Dad when he was doing DIY. Demon. He'd get like really annoyed. Everybody would get some if they were sort of around. And my mum tells the story one day of my dad looking to put up my cot when I was a baby. Either I was very nearly due or I was around, and my dad was looking to put up my cot, and he's getting more and more wound up with this cot. Yeah, it's a DIY cot. It's probably coming in about 53 pieces with like 27 nuts and bolts and whatever it might be, and my dad is getting more wound up. And my mum says he gets this way, he gets wound up, and eventually he just picks these bits up, he throws them down, he goes, "Oh, bloody Margaret Thatcher!" Margaret Thatcher, yeah. So this whole sort of problem, the problem was Margaret Thatcher. The person responsible for my dad's dodgy DIY was Margaret Thatcher. And, great sense of satisfaction. He'd explained it. Yeah? It certainly was not his DIY issues. It certainly was not to do with him. It was to do with Margaret Thatcher. So there's this sort of moment of like, yes, that's what it is. Yeah, it's this particular thing. I can explain it in this way, and so I'm back into control and out of uncertainty. We do it to groups of people as well. We sort of establish, okay, well, this group of people is like this. So we inhabit a world very often of good guys and bad guys, don't we? And we have huge theories to explain why certain groups of people are the good guys and why certain groups of people are the bad guys. Completely sort of simplified, totally sort of falsified, lacking any nuance, lacking seeing a complicated human being as part of another group. Yeah? And the more and more social isolation that you get between groups, the more you can get a total theory about that group that is never tested with any sort of social contact. You don't ever have to sort of put it to the test. And so we also get very, very wedded to that explanation, and then we get threatened when people come with alternative theories, don't they? So if we have a particular theory about the world, a view of the world, a Prapancha Samnya Sankhya that's got us out of, it's given an explanatory theory of why things happen. When people come and challenge that, we feel very threatened, don't we? Because we're sort of moved back into uncertainty again, and we don't want to go back there. We like this state. And then that leads to disharmony. Yeah? Because either on the individual level, we've got to this point, and of course somebody else has got to this point, and those two things that we're in conflict with, these two things here, are conflicting. Or we're doing it, groups of people are doing it, and it's leading to war and violence and whatever it might be. You've got all sort of groups of people that have explained the other's actions through a sort of total theory, usually one that's not very flattering to the other group of people, usually one that sort of dehumanizes them in some particular sort of way, and so then you lead to disharmony. So I'll start to finish up now, but what would be good to sort of finish up is to know, okay, well, what to do, what to sort of do to cut this situation, to start to cut across this situation. How do we address it? Well, the key is to come back to the start. Yeah, the problems start to arise when we get to Samnya, because we start interpreting and very often misinterpreting. So one of the things that we do, say for example with meditation, is we look to stop doing this interpretation, to stop trying to break up experience into little kind of concepts and bits, and just start to come back to the Vedana of an experience. Yeah. Okay. What's happening for me right now? Is this pleasant? If it's pleasant, can I try and avoid grasping to it? Can I try and avoid sort of looking of ways of sort of getting more and more of it? Can I avoid going into craving? If it's unpleasant, can I avoid going into aversion? Can I avoid going into hatred? Can I just stay with that particular Vedana and just sort of reside with it more and more and more? So can we just relax into the experience without trying to figure out how to either push it away, get rid of it, or get more of it? Can we just stay with the sort of raw experience of it? Can we just stay with the Vedana? And of course, as you know, the more that you do that, the more that this whole sort of cycle starts to calm down, and the more that actually the Vedana becomes just much more positive, much more kind of open, much more happy, much more connected, much more loving, all of those things, because all of this thing that leads to harmony has slowed down and stopped just by staying with the Vedana. So that's all you need to do, really, is to sort of go back to this initial thing. We can also ask, is our interpretation correct? Yeah. Now, usually what we need to start asking questions in that way is just to have relaxed this process a bit. Because if this process is going round and round and round, if we ask if our interpretation is correct, we'll probably go yes. We'll just go yes. It'll make the whole thing worse. So once we started to establish a little bit of mindfulness, we can start to go, okay, well, is our interpretation correct? Is there any counter evidence that suggests that the way that I've sort of framed this might not be the way that it is? You could talk with a friend, for example. Very, very good to ask friends in this situation. You say, hey, I'm thinking, is this, I've been upset by something. I'm wondering, is it this? And they might, if they're a good friend, they'll be able to go, oh, I wonder, well, let's look at the evidence for that, yeah? Let's see what we can find. And they won't be, if they're a good friend, they'll help you out with it as well. They'll go, oh no, I'm not so sure it's that simple actually. They'll recognise you're upset and that there's probably some truth to your theory, but it won't be as simple as it is. There's a really good, has anybody come across, there's a rule called Munger's, I think it's Munger's rule, it's in psychology. And the rule is never put down to malice what you can put down to incompetence. Yeah? It's a very, very good rule, because so often when I upset people, for example, I've done it out of incompetence. Yeah, I've done it because I've just been unmindful or forgetful or clumsy or something like that. I've not done it out of malice. It's just been a misunderstanding. Oh my God, we go around with so many misunderstandings, don't we? And it's because the people that have upset us have done it completely absent-mindedly. They didn't know they've done it at all. They sort of strayed into a sensitive spot or something like that, or they've triggered one of our little kind of habits or sensitivities or something like that. And they've not done it out of malice. They've done it out of absent-mindedness or whatever it might be. So is the interpretation one that's helpful and correct? And most of the time, interpretations that put malice onto people or malice onto groups of people won't be accurate. Very rarely it will be, but probably because they've done this sort of thing and think that you're acting with malice towards them. But most of the time it will just be absent-mindedness. Yeah. The other thing is to stay more in uncertainty. Yeah, stay more in uncertainty in this particular area, in the thinking. Keats talks about this, doesn't he? He talks about negative capability. He mentions it in his poems. And for Keats, negative capability is the capacity not to come to premature synthesis on things, not to come to premature theories on things, and to stay as long as possible in uncertainty. Because what Keats thought that did actually was gave us more opportunity for learning. As soon as we've come to certainty and a particular theory, the capacity to learn has been shut down, hasn't it? Because you've decided what's wrong, you're no longer curious about the situation, and you're not going to learn anything more from it. The more that you can stay on uncertainty, the discomfort of that uncertainty, the more chance that you're actually going to get a more accurate portrayal of what's happening, and the more chance that you're actually going to learn something and grow. So can we avoid coming into premature certainty about something, really staying open to being curious, questioning things, staying sort of open to other possibilities, open to other explanations. So staying out of that kind of real strong sort of certainty in that particular way. You can, it's interesting, say for example, if a friend has upset you, just avoiding putting an interpretation on what's happened and actually just going and talking to them. Very quickly it's cleared up. Very, very quickly it's cleared up usually, I find. Like you say, did you mean, this is what I heard, this is what I sort of picked up in that. Did you mean it that way? And most of the time, they'll find the vast majority of the time they didn't. Yeah, you've picked it up in the wrong way, or they've been a bit absent-minded, or whatever it might be. So the uncertainty, not going to your friend and going, "You did that on purpose," yeah, because you're not going to learn anything more about the situation then as well. Your friend will react negatively, reactively as well, and you won't learn anything more. You're straight off into disharmony, and you're straight off into conflict. And then I think just the last thing, if we're really in that sort of state of prapancha, can we avoid, can we just come right back to this point? Not trying to drop the whole kind of thing of thought, because what I've noticed is people don't make very good decisions from this particular place. Yeah. So coming back to mindfulness. So that's it, right? So we go, so Mahakachana has explained the whole thing. We go from sensation, Vedana, Samya interpretation, thought. Thought goes out of control and we get to prapancha. Prapancha eventually gets settled and we get an overall total theory of the situation. And that overall total theory of the situation leads us to taking up clubs, weapons, rods, backbiting, and overall disharmony. Yeah. So if you're interested to more on that, Subhuti's done all of that. I've done that in a class this evening and done it not much justice, because you can go into all of those really in much more detail. Yeah. And Subhuti, if you look for the Honeyball Sutta Subhuti on YouTube, you'll find all three of those. But let's leave it at that for this evening. Yeah, great. So what we'll do is we will just settle up tidy up the room before we go, and if you haven't given a donation when you come in, that's hugely appreciated. The centre runs on your generosity, and it really, really helps. So if you haven't given a donation when you come in, you could do that on your way out. We'll see you back next week anyway. Thank you. you.